You know how everyone's always talking about these LLMs being incredible black boxes, like they can write and translate and even code?
Hmm.
Well, a lot of you have asked us to look inside to try to understand just how they work.
Yeah,
So we're going to do a deep dive into this research paper, Transformer Dynamics, a neuroscientific approach to interpretability of large language models.
okay.
And get this, they actually apply neuroscience to understand AI.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
It's a cool approach. Like, instead of looking at just the code itself,
Right.
the researchers are looking at these models as complex systems
Mm-hmm.
with their own dynamics, almost like,
Like they're studying a brain.
yeah, like studying the brain.
Wow, so instead of lines of code, we're thinking about neurons and synapses.
Kinda, yeah. And what's interesting is what they found is that LLMs may be much more organized
Okay.
than we initially thought. Like, there are hidden patterns in there,
Really?
and even hints of what they call self-correction within the model.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. So where do we even begin to unpack all this?
Well, the researchers focused on a part of the transformer architecture
Okay.
called the residual stream.
Residual stream.
And essentially, this is,
Like a pathway?
yeah, the pathway where information flows
Okay.
and is transformed across the different layers of the model.
Can you give us maybe a more tangible picture of what that looks like?
So imagine like a river
Okay.
that's carrying information downstream.
Mm-hmm.
And as the water flows, right,
Yeah.
it's modified and reshaped
Mm-hmm.
by the riverbed and the rocks and the currents. And so that's kind of like the residual stream,
Okay.
where information is being transformed as it passes through each layer of the model.
I like that. That's a good analogy. So what happens to the information as it's flowing through this river?
Well, they found that the individual units within the residual stream
Okay.
go more active and more correlated
Okay.
as information flows through them.
So it's like the river is getting deeper
Like the river's getting deeper
and the currents are
and the currents are aligning more.
becoming more unified.
Yes.
Okay. But wouldn't that mean that the layers are all becoming the same?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. So while the correlations increase,
Okay.
the mutual information between layers actually decreases
Hey,
after the early layers.
Hold on. So things are becoming more connected but sharing less information.
Yeah,
How does that?
it seems counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Right. Um, one way to think about it is that the model is actually simplifying the information
Okay.
and favoring linear relationships over complex ones.
So it's like it's finding the most efficient path.
Yeah, like it's finding the most efficient path for the river to flow,
Interesting.
getting rid of all the unnecessary meanders.
So it's streamlining the information flow?
Hmm.
Okay. So does that relate at all to that whole self-correction idea that you mentioned?
It might, yeah. But before we get to that, they also found something else that was really interesting.
What's that?
They found that the individual units within the residual stream exhibit rotational patterns.
Whoa, hold on. So now I'm picturing this really dynamic swirling river.
Yeah, it's like
Okay.
it's like finding tiny whirlpools
Okay.
in our information river.
What's the significance of these whirlpools?
Well, these rotational dynamics connect to a concept
Yeah.
in undynamical systems theory
Okay.
called unstable periodic orbits.
Unstable periodic orbits.
And you can imagine like a leaf that's caught in a whirlpool, right?
Yeah.
And it's following this predictable path,
Mm-hmm.
but there are slight variations each time around. So it kind of implies this underlying order,
Okay.
even within a complex and ever-changing system.
So even at the micro level of individual units, there's this structured pattern.
Yes.
This is making me rethink how these models work. But how did the researchers actually visualize the overall flow of information in the residual stream? That sounds pretty complex.
Yeah, so they used
Like a simplified view?
they used what's called dimensionality reduction techniques to simplify how they view the data.
Okay.
It's like
Like zooming out
yeah, it's like a super-powered zoom out
to see the whole thing.
to see the entire river's path from above
Oh,
with
wow.
all of its bends and turns.
So what did this bird's eye view show? Was it just chaos or was there some sort of order?
Well, they found these really elegant curving trajectories
Okay.
in a low-dimensional space. So think of it as like a map of the information flow,
Mm-hmm.
and it revealed this graceful path.
Instead of just a chaotic mess.
Yeah.
So we're seeing structure and organization
Yeah.
instead of just these random connections. This is already blowing my mind. And then didn't they do this teleportation thing? What exactly did that involve and how did the model react?
Yeah, so that's where it gets really interesting
Okay.
and where we start to see these hints of self-correction. So the researchers took the model's activations
Okay.
and teleported them
So they're just
to
like,
different points in this low-dimensional space.
picking up a section of the river and putting it somewhere else.
Yeah, imagine picking up a section of the river and placing it in a new location.
So they're deliberately disrupting the flow of information to
Exactly.
see what happens.
It's like scientists poking and prodding to see how the system reacts.
Exactly.
And what they found is that the model exhibited a tendency to return to its original trajectory after being telecated.
So even after being diverted, the river wanted to get back on course. What does that tell us?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. But before we try to answer that, maybe we should look a little deeper into how the location of the teleportation affected the results.
You mean like teleporting the information at the beginning of the river versus the middle or the end? Would that make a difference?
It absolutely did, yeah. And that's what we'll explore next.
Okay, so we're picking back up with that whole teleportation thing. Remember how they were moving the model's activations around
Right,
to
right.
different points in the trajectory?
Uh-huh.
And you were saying the location where they did that had a big impact
Yeah, yeah.
on how things turned out?
It did. Think back to that river analogy.
Okay.
Like messing with the flow,
Yeah.
right at the source.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be totally different than like diverting it further down.
Right, like if you shake things up at the headwaters,
Right.
those ripples are going to go through the whole system.
Exactly.
But further down, maybe not so much.
Yeah, that's what they observed.
Oh, interesting.
When they teleported the activations in those early layers,
Yeah.
the model, it got more unpredictable.
Oh, really?
Like shaking up the river at its source.
Right.
Things could go kind of any which way.
So it was more sensitive to those disruptions early on.
Yeah, in the early stages.
Okay, but what about those middle layers? You said that's where they saw more of that self-correction.
Yeah, the model was more resilient
Interesting.
in those middle layers.
Even after being diverted.
Even after they were diverted.
Okay.
The activations, they tended to go back to their original trajectory.
Like the river had carved a deeper channel?
Yeah, like it carved a deeper channel.
So it's harder to mess with it.
Harder to really change its course, yeah.
So something about those middle layers helps it self-direct.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier cosine similarity and velocity.
Yeah, I was going to say, didn't you say that played a role too?
They do. They do.
I have to admit, those are still kind of fuzzy for me.
Yeah. So think of cosine similarity as like
Okay.
it measures how aligned the residual stream vectors are
Okay.
between layers. Like if they're pointing in basically the same direction,
Yeah.
high cosine similarity.
So if they're aligned, the information flows smoothly?
Exactly. Between the layers. Yeah. Now, velocity, on the other hand,
Okay.
that captures how quickly the information is changing between layers.
So low velocity means gradual changes.
Precisely.
Okay, got it.
And they found that the self-correction was strongest.
Yeah.
In the middle layers where cosine similarity and velocity were low,
Okay.
but mutual information was high.
Okay, wait. Before we go any further,
Yeah.
remind me what mutual information tells us again.
Right, so mutual information, it measures how much we can learn about one layer
Okay.
by looking at another layer.
Okay.
So high mutual information means there's like a strong
Connection.
strong informational link. Yeah.
Okay, so to recap, in those middle layers,
Yeah.
the information's flowing smoothly, changes are happening slowly, and there's a strong connection between the layers.
Yeah, that's where the self-correction is strongest.
So what does all that tell us?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The fact that it's strongest under those specific conditions,
Mm-hmm.
it really raises questions about how LLMs represent information.
What kind of questions?
Like, could it be that LLMs
Yeah,
are finding the most efficient way to represent information
right, from the get-go.
early on in the process?
Wow, so like there's something inherently efficient
Yeah, it's a possibility.
about the way these models are structured.
It's definitely a new way to think about it.
We were talking before about those elegant trajectories.
Right, right.
Could that be a sign of this underlying efficiency?
It's a good question. If self-correction is strongest,
Yeah.
where information is shared effectively
Mm-hmm.
and changes happen gradually,
Mm-hmm.
maybe that means the model is finding that optimal path.
So instead of just being these complex black boxes,
Yeah.
there's this elegant order to the way they operate.
Precisely. And it's not just about appreciating that,
Right.
understanding these dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
It could change how we develop LLMs in the future.
Makes you think about all the potential.
Yeah.
Like, if we understand how they self-correct,
Right?
can we use that to build even better AI systems?
That's one of the exciting things about that.
Like an LLM that could find and fix its own mistakes
Yeah,
automatically.
that would be huge.
That would be a big step forward
For sure.
for reliable AI.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've covered a lot.
Yeah, we have.
From rivers to teleporting
Downstream.
to self-correcting whirlpools.
It's been a journey.
I think a little recap would be good before
Yes.
we get into the bigger implications of all this.
Yeah, good idea.
All right, so we've gone on this wild journey
Yeah.
through rivers of information and
It's
teleporting
been a while.
to self-correcting whirlpools.
Right.
Let's recap what we've actually learned about how these things work.
Yeah, so what we found
Yeah.
is that there's a lot more structure
Mm-hmm.
and order going on than we think.
It's like we cracked open the black box
Yeah.
and found this hidden world
Uh-huh.
of patterns and self-correction.
Exactly. So remember the residual stream?
Yeah.
That pathway.
Where the information flows.
Right, and they found that those units in the stream
Yeah.
become more active and correlated
Mm-hmm.
as information moves through.
Right. It's like it's finding that most efficient path
The most efficient path.
and smoothing out all the unnecessary stuff.
Right, and that's where
Yeah.
those terms cosine similarity
Yeah.
and velocity
Right.
come in. So high cosine similarity.
Yeah.
It means smooth flow between layers.
Okay.
And low velocity means...
Like gradual changes.
Exactly. And when you add in high mutual information,
Mm-hmm.
it's a strong connection between the layers.
You get strong
So those middle layers where all that happened,
That's the sweet spot.
that's where they saw it bouncing back after the teleportation. Exactly. And it suggests that
Mm-hmm.
the way information is represented in those layers
Yeah.
is special.
Which brings us back to that big question.
Uh-huh.
Are LLMs figuring out the most efficient way
Uh-huh.
to represent information?
Right from the beginning.
It's amazing to think about.
It is. Gives us a whole new way to think about it.
So instead of random connections, we're seeing these trajectories and patterns.
Yeah. Instead of just blind computation.
Yeah.
We're seeing hints of
This self-correction.
this self-correction and a drive for efficiency.
Makes you wonder what else is hiding in there.
Yeah, what else we might find?
So what if we could actually use this
Yeah.
to design better AI?
What if we could harness this?
Imagine an LLM that could
I know.
correct itself.
Yeah, like catch and fix.
Like inconsistencies.
Yeah, in real time.
That would be huge for
Oh, yeah.
so many fields.
Totally.
It's amazing to think about the possibilities.
It is. It all comes down to this
Mm.
shift in how we see these things.
Not just code,
Right, not just code.
but like a dynamic system.
Exactly.
So what would you say
Right.
is the main takeaway?
Well, I think the big thing is
Yeah.
we're just getting started
Yeah.
understanding these systems. There's a whole world of dynamics.
We're right.
And by using what we know from neuroscience,
Mm-hmm.
we can do even more with AI.
I think the big thing I learned is we got to keep asking questions,
Yeah.
keep pushing the boundaries.
That's how we move forward.
Well, I think we've given everyone a lot to think about.
Hopefully even spark some ideas.
Maybe even a new research project or two.
That would be amazing.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We'll catch you next time.
12 Record.